everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. Today I want to share with you how to use the Clair stamps backgrounds. And I have 3 card ideas, all with different backgrounds, to show you a few different ways you can use them. So the thing with the Clair background stamps, they are clear background stamps. And they're really easy to work with. They're a nice high quality clear photopolymer stamp. They're made in America and they stamp really well. So that's not an issue. But they are a little bit smaller than your regular 6x6 backgrounds. These measure 4 inches by 5 3/4. So they're not completely A2 in size. That being said, there are still a lot of really fun ways to use these. I'm going to start off using the falling leaves background stamp. With this one, I'm going to keep it on the backing sheet and use the backing sheet as a guide to know where I need to lay my paper down. In order to do that, you want to make sure that your stamp is properly aligned on that backing sheet or it's going to be off. So I like to go ahead and just make sure it's nice and lined up with those little images on the back of the backing sheet, and then I can go ahead and stamp my image. This is my favorite way to use them because I don't have to take them off the backing sheet to use them, and this is how I use a lot of red rubber background stamps as well that are 6x6. I just keep them on my work surface and flip them over to where the stamp is facing up. Now another thing to consider when you're stamping with a background stamp, especially when you are doing it this way. You need to make sure that you have a really good ink pad and you're using a really good ink that's going to stamp well. If your ink is a little dry, or if you just have an ink pad that it's very light and it doesn't stamp really well the first time stamping it, don't use it this way. If you want to use a background stamp and you want to use that kind of ink pad, use a stamp positioner. With this way of stamping with your background stamps, you're going to get one go. Unless you are super good at lining up, and I mean like really, really good, you're not going to get another chance to line this up again. So I like to go ahead and just place my cardstock right down on top of that stamp, grab a piece of computer paper, place that over the top so I don't smear a bunch of ink around, and then start pressing down onto the stamp. This is going to transfer that image onto the cardstock. Now, if you feel like you're not getting a really good impression or you just want to make sure that you're getting every single area of that stamp, use an ink brayer or use an acrylic block and just rub over the back of that. That's going to give you some nice even pressure. And it's not going to push the cardstock down into the little divots that might be in this stamp and pick up extra ink. That being said, I did use my finger first and I do have a few smudges. That's okay. You can easily remove those with a sanding eraser or a sanding block, and that is just going to clean up that background area. These are really great to have on hand, especially with larger backgrounds where maybe they're not so detailed or the images aren't so close up and you have a little bit of open space. You might pick up some ink that has transferred onto those open spaces. So these sanding erasers and sanding blocks really help to just remove that extra ink. It's also great if you do a lot of masking and you do a lot of smudges with that. It happens. This is a great way to remove those little smudges, and sanding blocks and sanding erasers are very, very cheap. On my cards today, I am going to make the backgrounds the main focus of my cards. They're going to really be my entire cards. So for this, I'm just going to go ahead and color it in. I stamped with the VersaFine Clair Pinecone ink, which is a nice dark brown ink. And then I'm just going to color in with my alcohol markers. I use the Blick Studio brush markers. These are great. I have a review on them. If you want to check that out, I'll leave it linked down below. This is one of those background stamps where you can really have fun and play around with the color combinations. You can also play around with the different coloring mediums you use. You can just ink blend over this background, which I have done before. I'll leave that video linked down below because you can create some really great resist effects with these backgrounds. Now, I'm going to just color this in very, very quickly. I'm using some fall colors. So I used some greens, some reds, some oranges, yellows, and browns. And I'm just using 2 colors for each leaf. I'm also going to keep each color for each type of leaf that is on this stamp. That's just going to help me figure out what colors to use and where, and it's going to help me separate them and not get too many of the same colors right next to each other. If you decide to color in your backgrounds, before you stamp, think about what coloring medium you do want to use. That's going to help you choose the ink that you want to use. So here I used VersaFine Clair. It doesn't play the best with alcohol markers. It doesn't really smear. It just kind of fades with them. Um, but if I would have been thinking ahead, I probably would have used my Memento markers or my Memento inks for this. But I went ahead and used VersaFine Clair. It still works, but just think about what kind of coloring medium you're going to be using if you're coloring before you stamp it down. And if you are new to card making and you don't know what inks to use, do a Google search, look online. You can look on my channel. I have a few videos about what inks work with what coloring mediums. And also test it out if you can't find the answer just on a scrap piece of paper before you bring it to your card. That's what I did when I was a new card maker. I just tested it out on a piece of scrap paper to see if it would work. So I am going to finish up the last little leaves here with my coloring, and then I have this gorgeous background ready to be my card pretty much. Now, as I was stamping out this background, I did not place this exactly right. I also made my cardstock just a little bit wider. That gives me a little bit of leeway so I don't have any hangover on one side or the other. However, whenever I go to put this on my card, I want to go ahead and trim those edges off. So I like to make my cardstock bigger than what I need when I stamp it down, and then I just like to trim it off once I'm ready to go and put it on my card. That way it's not crooked, it's not weird looking. It's just easier for me to go about it this way than to try to get it perfectly positioned on that stamp. So once I had that done, I went ahead and just matted it down with a piece of craft cardstock. I also die cut an oval and added the Sending Prayers with the same VersaFine Clair Pinecone ink that I used to stamp my background image with. That is pretty much the card. I popped up that oval, added everything to an A2 top folding card base to finish it off. Super simple. I kept the background the main focus, and that was it. Now let's move on to the next card. For this one, I'm going to use this background stamp. This is a fun one. I've used this one as well. Now, the tulle background is a good one to have for Father's Day. I'll leave the video that I use this in linked down below. 3 Simple Father's Day Cards is what it's called if you want to do a search for it as well. Now, I want to be stamping, or I'm going to be stamping on watercolor paper for this background. Because watercolor paper has a little bit of texture, I want to be able to double stamp this. I'm using my Misty to do that, and I'm using my full-size Misty. If you have a mini Misty, these stamps really don't fit in there, and you're going to have overhang, which won't give you a good impression. The full-size Misty is the way to go in using these. To get the paper to stay exactly where I want it in my Misty, I added some removable adhesive to the back, and I placed it down onto my grid. That's going to hold it in place even if the clear stamp is a little sticky and it wants to pull that paper up. To stamp, I'm going to use the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I thought ahead this time. I know I'm going to be watercoloring this, so I know this works well with watercolor. So I'll go ahead and just stamp it down a few times. I will leave the removable adhesive that I use linked down below in the description box along with all of the other supplies that I used today. But if you do not have removable adhesive and you still want to try this technique with any stamp you may have that may be a little sticky, just try regular adhesive. And then whenever you want to take it off, it will pull away easily if you have the mouse pad. If you don't have the mouse pad, put a piece of plastic underneath and stick it to that. Make sure it's a full size that will lay down nice in your Misty, and then have it tucked into that corner so you know exactly where this needs to go. Then whenever you want to, where I would remove the adhesive, you can't remove a permanent adhesive, take your embossing bag or baby powder or cornstarch and just rub some over that adhesive, and that's going to take away the stick so it won't be adhesive anymore. That's a good way to get around if you're out of removable adhesive or if you just don't have it on hand. Now, like I said, I'm going to be watercoloring my background for this card, and for that I am using the Memento markers. These are one of my most used coloring mediums, and I did not think they would be, to be quite honest. These are a great marker to do watercolor with, just to color, which I'll show you later in this video, and they're also great for multicolor stamping, especially some really fine details. You can get in to those really tight spaces with the point on the brush tip, and you can stamp down and do different colors stamping that way. It's a really fun way to stamp. I have a video about that too if you want to check it out. Like I said, though, I'm going to be using these to watercolor. You can take these straight to the paper and then blend out that way, but I wanted this to be very, very, very light, and these markers are very, very pigmented. In order to get that pigment down a little bit, I just put them on a palette and pick them up with a water brush. You can also use a regular watercolor brush too. But to get that pigment just a little bit lighter, I just blend in some water and really tone it down that way to get this really nice wash look. So that is pretty much this card too. Like I said, I wanted the backgrounds to be the main focus. So all I did again with this one, because it is that little bit thinner than your normal A2 size, I like to mat these backgrounds. I put just 2 strips of gray cardstock on either side of that. So I didn't use a full piece behind this. It saves a little bit of cardstock. Then I took that same gray cardstock, stamped Happy Birthday, and just trimmed it out really, really tiny and popped it up in the bottom right-hand corner. This is super simple, but it's the perfect masculine birthday card in my opinion. Nice and clean and simple and easy. So on my third and final card, I'll be using this background stamp. Again, I've used this one before. It is so, so fun. Especially for this time of year. I love Christmas lights. We already have ours up and turned on. I'm sure our neighbors love us for that, but we go early for Christmas. I'm going to stamp this one just like I did the last card in my Misty. I'm using regular cardstock for this, and I'll be die cutting this background. So I'm going to go bigger for this. I don't need to position this perfectly. However, the reason I am using my Misty is because I will be doing multicolor stamping with this. So I want to make sure that I get perfect placement both times I stamp this. Now, because clear stamps are just by nature that little bit more sticky and they want to pull your cardstock up whenever you're stamping on them, I like to add that removable adhesive and just stick it down in my Misty so I know it's not going anywhere and I don't have to worry about trying to get it repositioned in there and maybe being a little off. For this, I'll be stamping with the VersaFine Clair. This is the Rainforest ink. I want that kind of green look on the lines and the little bulbs themselves. And I'll just do a double stamping because I have the option. With this, you really don't need to with these inks and these stamps. But I had it out. I had it in my Misty. I thought, why not? I'd already inked it up once. Might as well ink it up again. Make sure I get it perfect. So I'll go ahead and stamp that down again, and then I'll clean the stamp really, really well. For the little lines that are coming out from the light bulb that make it look like they're shining, I didn't want those green. I wanted those black. So in order to get those stamped down with black, I didn't want to mask off each light bulb. So what I like to do whenever I'm doing really intricate multicolor stamping like this, I stamp with my lighter color first, whatever color that may be. I can go ahead and stamp that down and then come in with my darker color in the parts of the stamp that I want that to be that color and stamp it right over the top. The darker color will cover up and cancel out that lighter color, especially when I'm using a pigment ink and then a lighter ink or a marker like this on top. It's just going to work really well. Like I said before, these memento markers are super handy to have on hand, especially for multicolor stamping like I'm doing here. So Most of the time when I do multicolor stamping, I just mask with painter's tape or something along those lines, or I just try and not get any ink where I don't want it. However, on something like this where it's such fine detail and so close together, it's just easier to come in with a marker and just color in those spots that need stamped. Now I'm going line by line so this ink does not dry on my stamp as I'm stamping it down. It's just going to give me a little bit more time so I don't feel like I'm so rushed in getting this stamp down or colored in, and it allows me to be a little bit more careful as well. Now, with this one, I am being very precise with my multicolor stamping. You can also just go in and do a full background of different colored images. This would be really fun on the leaf stamp that I did with the first card. Just take different colors, color them all over the background, and stamp it down with your stamp positioner a few times and kind of get a marbled effect. That would be a really fun background as well. So a bunch of different techniques you can use with these background stamps. Now once I have all of my little lines colored black, it's time to go ahead and color in these lights. I am doing a lot of coloring on these backgrounds, and it's not intricate coloring, it's just a fun way to add a little something to these cards. For this, I'm doing no shading and blending. I'm using the Memento markers that I used previously, and I'm doing them in rainbow order. So I have the red, the orange, the yellow, the green, the blue, and the violet. I will leave exact colors that I used down below. The way the Imagine website works, though, is all of the colors are on one page. So all you need to do is go down to that page, find the color I used, click that color swatch, and then you can add the marker, you can add the big ink pad, or you can add the little dewdrops. So that is the way the Memento line works. You have a big ink pad, you have a little dewdrop ink pad, and you have a marker all in the same color. So it's a great way to kind of color match, especially if you want to do maybe some no line coloring. You can stamp in that color and then color in the image, and it will look perfect because the colors match. I will also say that these are water-based markers. These are not alcohol-based markers. You don't do blending, or, I mean, you can with watercolor, I guess, but these are water-based markers and they are not refillable. So once they run out, you do have to replace the entire marker. Just a little FYI, a little tidbit about these markers. So there is a close look at that background. And like I said when I stamped this, I didn't need it to be perfect because I'll be die cutting this background. I'm using an oval from the Waffle Flower oval die set. These die sets, they have a lot of different shapes, all nesting die sets. These are a great price, especially on scrapbook.com. I will leave that link down below. Really great price for these nesting die sets, and they don't have any stitching or anything. They're just very plain, which I love. So that is my background for that card. But I want to create a few little poinsettia, I guess you could say embellishments to go on this card, but I'm just going to be stamping these out. This stamp set is one of my favorites from Clair. I have a video all about how to use this, and then I also have another technique video where I do some tone-on-tone ink blending. I'll leave both of those linked down below. I use this stamp set, and it shows you how to use it and create these really fun poinsettia images. So, so fun. But I use that stamp set to build those poinsettias, and then I also use the sentiment Merry Christmas, stamp that down and heat embossed with black. I use the black embossing powder from Imagine as well. I matted that background with another craft oval die, placed everything on an A2 card base to finish this very, very, very simple Christmas card. I just really love those poinsettias though. Be sure to check out that stamp set. That is going to do it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed a look at the Clair backgrounds, their size, and how to use that on your A2 size cards, and a few fun ways to color them in, and all the different options and ways you can use them. That is going to do it for me today. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to check out the description box for a whole lot of info, and if you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe. Happy crafting, everyone!